My name is Kimberly, and although I am now in my 50s, I remember that morning as if it were yesterday. I was only 33 then, and I felt as if I was standing on the threshold of something big, something real. I worked as an investment analyst in a reputable financial company and, I must say, I was climbing the career ladder quite confidently. My reports were praised, I was invited to serious meetings, and everything that I achieved was the result of my own persistence, sleepless nights, and that very inner stubbornness that I probably inherited from my father. And now, after all these years of constant saving, rented apartments, and compromises, I was finally able to buy my first own house. Not a mansion, no, but it was my house, with my keys, my windows, my walls, and that was the main thing. The house was perfect, nothing extra, but everything necessary. A warm kitchen with a cozy corner by the window, a spacious bedroom, a quiet backyard where smoke from a cup of coffee curls in the morning, but the most important thing is my home office, a bright room with large windows and built-in bookshelves, where I could work in silence, with a view of the maples and a neat fence. When I first sat down at the table there, my heart began to beat as fast as in childhood before Christmas. Everything inside whispered that this was my place, my refuge, my achievement. And before we continue, write in the comments from which city you are watching this video. Enjoy watching. The move went quickly. I started packing long before the deal, as if I had a premonition that everything would work out. The house did not require any repairs or alterations. I just walked in and stayed. The decision to celebrate the housewarming came spontaneously, but it was absolutely right. I invited everyone, friends from work, old girlfriends, a couple of second cousins, and, of course, my family, mom, dad, younger sister Melissa and her fiancé, that arrogant handsome man who always wore suits, as if he came from the cover of a magazine. The party started lively, with light music, laughter, the smell of snacks and champagne. Everyone looked around the house with interest, made compliments. How cozy, what a kitchen you have, this office is just a dream. I showed them every corner with such pride, as if I was handing each of them a piece of my success. I stood in the center of the living room, surrounded by people I love, and for the first time in a long time I felt truly grown up, accomplished. And then they showed up, my family. They arrived last. As always happened, Mom was the first to enter the house, and before she could even walk down the hallway, she looked around the room with a look that was not filled with admiration, but something else, a restrained criticality, the same reproach that I remembered from childhood. "Well, the house looks not bad," she said with a smile that remained on her lips but did not reach her eyes. Dad just nodded silently and followed her, barely looking around. Their faces spoke louder than words. I didn't have to ask, I knew. They did not approve, were not impressed, and were certainly not going to hide it. I tried to change the subject, returning to my friends again, showing them the shelves with books, where an old volume of Shirley Jackson's stories nestled comfortably among the economic reviews. But I noticed how Melissa, usually chatty and cheerful, stood in the corner, barely moving, her eyes wandering somewhere, and her lips pressed into a thin line. She seemed distant, as if her thoughts were somewhere far away, but her fiancé wasted no time. With an arrogant smile, he began to comment on the house. The ceilings were low, the windows were small, the area was too modest. "Your parents have more space in the living room than you have on the entire first floor," he said smugly, and then, as if finishing me off, he added, "My apartment in Manhattan has more windows than this entire house." I felt everything boiling inside me, but I did not let myself break down. I smiled, broadly, coldly, reservedly. "You know," I said, without raising my voice, "the difference is that I bought this with my own money. And your parents bought you your apartment." My words sounded clear, like the clink of crystal in a quiet room. He turned pale, then blushed, and without saying a word, left the house. Melissa ran after him, and my mother came up to me and muttered through her teeth, "You can't control your disgusting temper again." My father said nothing, but he looked at me with a look full of disappointment, and after them, the three of them left the house, leaving behind a heavy silence. I sighed, shrugged, and, turning to my friends, said loudly, "Let's keep celebrating." And, as if someone had lifted an invisible burden from the guests' shoulders, the evening was immediately filled with a new wave of joy. We laughed, danced, remembered old stories, and for the first time in a long time, I felt free. 2 months passed, not a single call, not a single text from my parents or Melissa, and frankly, I was glad of it. without the constant complaints, reproaches, and endless requests to borrow money that they never paid back, I suddenly realized how much easier it was to breathe. I slept better, I had more energy, and, lo and behold, my bank account began to grow pleasantly. But one evening, as I was wrapped in a soft blanket, reading by the fireplace, the phone rang. On the screen, Mom. I picked up the phone, and for the first time in a long time, I heard something unexpected in her voice. Warmth. Kimberly, dear, she said softly, almost affectionately, I'd like to invite you to a family dinner. Would you like to come over this weekend? I was taken aback. There was no reproach or sarcasm in her voice, just something reminiscent of regret. I agreed. Something told me they wanted to talk, maybe apologize. As I reached my parents' house, clutching the steering wheel tightly with both hands, a whirlwind of emotions raged inside me, from mild anxiety to a strange premonition that something was wrong, although I convinced myself that maybe I was wrong after all, and they really just wanted to apologize. As soon as I entered, I immediately noticed that Melissa was already here. She was sitting in the living room, alone. The groom was not visible either in the room or in the yard, and there was some kind of tense composure in her posture, as if she knew in advance that the conversation would not be easy. We barely exchanged words. My mother invited us to the table, and everything seemed like some kind of theater, where I, without knowing it, was already playing a role, the script for which was written without my participation. As soon as we settled in, my mother looked at me with an expression on her face that I hadn't seen since my first performance on the school stage, warm, soft, even a little faint affectionate. Kimberly, she began, but didn't finish, and after a short pause, much calmer and more confident, she said, I have a favor to ask of you, and then her words flowed quietly, like water on glass, but with each new sentence the coldness from them became more and more noticeable. You see, your sister's fiancé's family, they are really very wealthy, and, of course, they don't want to lose face in front of their friends and business partners. We want to have a wedding that will match their level. We need $230,000, and the groom, of course, will add the same amount. I was dumbfounded, literally. I sat at this table, in this painfully familiar living room with beige curtains, and I couldn't believe that all of this was actually happening. Are you serious? Was all I could choke out, feeling the blood pounding in my temples. But my mom seemed to have braced herself for this reaction, because she continued calmly, as if she were talking about ordering flowers or choosing napkins. We invited you here because we know you have a good savings account. You told me yourself when you were talking about buying a house that you have a pretty good account. I felt the tension in my chest growing with each word, and then Melissa leaned forward, her voice, usually bright and cheerful, sounding almost like an ultimatum. Kimberly, I need you to give me that 230 grand. It's important to me. This will be the perfect wedding. I slowly leaned back in my chair, as if trying to distance myself from everything that was happening, to take at least a step back from this absurdity. Are you crazy? I asked, no longer hiding my indignation. Do you really want to throw a wedding for almost $500,000 when you don't have a cent? And you expect me, after all these years of hard work, to just go and give my money for an evening of show? My mother looked at me without blinking. That's exactly why we invited you, she said quietly, but with a firmness that seemed frightening to me. No, I said, and felt the word reverberate inside me with the force of a blow. I will not give you that money, not now, not ever. I am categorically against spending that kind of money on weddings, especially when it's not about love, but about an experience. Melissa immediately burst into tears, real tears, with a convulsive sigh and trembling lips. You're just jealous, she gasped through her sobs, because you don't have a boyfriend and you don't know what it's like to be a happy bride. It was a slap in the face, but it hurt even more when Dad spoke for the first time that evening. His voice was quiet, but there was no sympathy in it, only reproach. Kimberly, by saying no, you're jeopardizing your sister's wedding. You're part of this family, you have to help. I stood up, slowly, trying not to flare up right there at the table. My heart was pounding, my breathing was sharp. I grabbed my purse from the back of the chair, turned away, and walked out of the house without looking at them. Feeling my legs buckle, I got into the car, turned the key in the ignition, and only when I pulled away did I realize that my hands were shaking with rage. $230,000. Did they really think that I would just give them almost $250,000 without a word? For a whim, for one day, for an event that would disappear as soon as the lights went out in the ballroom. For the next week, my phone rang nonstop. First there were the calls, Mom, Melissa, even Dad, then the messages, voicemails, sometimes with requests, in a soft tone, with "You've always been our rock," sometimes with irritation, with accusations, with reproaches. Melissa sent me voicemails in which she cried bitterly, saying that I was ruining her dream, ruining her life. My parents wrote about family loyalty, about how ashamed they were of me, of my selfish behavior. I didn't answer, I just turned off the sound, put the phone in a drawer and went to the office to work, to not think, and I didn't doubt my decision for a second. I was not obliged to sacrifice everything I had earned with such difficulty for the sake of their crazy fantasies. A week later, when the morning had not yet had time to dispel the chill, and the sun was just beginning to break through the curtains, someone began to knock loudly on my door. It was Melissa. She stood with red eyes, in a crumpled sweater, and demanded that I let her in. I knew what would happen next: more tears, more persuasion, another attempt to press into a sense of guilt. I did not open the door, and she did not leave. She sat on my doorstep all day, telling the neighbors what a cruel sister I was, how I had abandoned my family in need. One man walking his dog even knocked on my door. "Are you okay?" I nodded without opening the door. That evening, she finally left. I thought the worst was over. The silence that followed that scene was a balm. A month passed, and neither Melissa nor my parents called or wrote again. I began to calm down, to allow myself to think that maybe they had accepted the rejection, resigned themselves, and maybe even decided to reconsider their plans and make a more reasonable choice. And then, one unremarkable Tuesday, while I was working from my office at home, checking client account statements, the phone rang. I almost didn't answer. The silence of the last few weeks had taught me to be cautious, but when I saw who was calling, I picked it up right away. "Aunt Linda?" I said, surprised. Aunt Linda is my father's sister, and since childhood she has been my favorite in our large, complex family. She has always been special to me, not just a blood relative, but a person next to whom I felt I didn't have to prove anything. Didn't have to justify my decisions, wasn't cornered by expectations. Aunt Linda is the only person in our family who never looked at my successes as a personal purse, who didn't try to turn my independence into her own benefit, who perceived my achievements with sincere pride, and not with veiled envy. She never asked me for money, didn't hint, didn't complain about difficulties in order to extract a check from me, and perhaps that is why I valued her opinion so much, because only she truly understood me. "Hi, Kimberly," she said, and I was immediately wary. Her voice, usually calm and confident, sounded different somehow, tense, as if she herself wasn't yet sure whether she should say what she was about to say. "I need to talk to you about something important." I felt everything inside me snap, as if someone had pressed an alarm button. "What happened?" I asked, already knowing that the answer would not please me. Linda sighed, and there was a short but thick silence on the phone. "I stopped by your parents yesterday. I just wanted to drop off a few things. Your uncle asked me to give something to your dad. They didn't know I was coming, so I let myself in. I have a spare key, as you may recall. That's what I always do, nothing special." I listened, trying not to interrupt, because I sensed that she hadn't said the most important thing yet. "I was in the hallway," she went on, "and I heard her and Melissa talking in the kitchen. They didn't know I was there. I stopped, wanted to call out to them, but then I just froze." I tensed. "What were they talking about?" I asked, although my heart was already pounding so loudly I could barely hear my own voice. "They were talking about selling the house. In 2 months. They said they'd use the money to pay for Melissa's wedding, and then," her voice softened, almost sympathetic, "they're planning on showing up at your place, like they just need a place to stay." I held my breath as Linda continued, "But Kimberly, they never said it was temporary. They said they weren't going to throw them out. They talked about your terrible personality, but they were sure that you wouldn't dare look like a bad daughter in front of others." I said nothing. I just sat there, clutching the phone as if the strength of my grip could hold the power to destroy my entire world. "And that's not all," Linda added. "They said they were going to announce it at your mom's 55th birthday party next month. They said that if they announced it in front of the guests, you wouldn't be able to say no without looking like a monster." I closed my eyes. "They were planning to ambush me," I whispered, barely audible. "Exactly," Linda confirmed. "They discussed it as a strategy, They kept saying that you wouldn't dare say no in front of everyone, that she wouldn't have the heart to humiliate her parents in front of her friends. They sounded pleased, very pleased with themselves. I felt my insides tighten. This wasn't just disappointment anymore. This was betrayal in its purest form. The people who were supposed to be my rock, my family, were plotting to trap me, to make me look bad if I didn't go along with their plan. They were going to sell their house, leave me homeless, blow the money on a tacky, flamboyant wedding, and then just show up on my doorstep, expecting me to accept them without a word of reproach. Kimberly, are you okay? Linda asked, her voice full of concern again, as if she sensed how much I was going through. I don't know, I answered honestly. I can't believe they would do this to me. I'm sorry I had to tell you this, she said, but I thought you should know. You should be prepared. I exhaled. I said, feeling the lump in my throat slowly dissipate. You have no idea how grateful I am. Thank you, Linda, really. After we hung up, I sat in my office for a long time, unable to move or even formulate what was going on in my head. My gaze was fixed on the empty wall opposite, but something else was in front of my eyes: the conversation in the kitchen, my parents' happy faces, Melissa's worried face, and the three of them laughing, discussing how easily I would give in, and all I felt was not just pain. It was rage. They no longer asked me for money, did not try to persuade me. They decided that they could destroy their financial security, and then make it my problem, sell the house, spend hundreds of thousands in one day, and then move in with me forever, under the pretext of a temporary stay. I knew that they weren't going to pay for utilities, buy groceries, help around the house. They just wanted to lie on my shoulders, stretch out across the entire width of my house, and turn me into a housewife who would feed, clean, and keep quiet, because a daughter should. And the scariest thing is not the idea itself, it's that they were going to do it publicly, using my vulnerability, my desire to be good, polite, fair. They knew that if they confronted me with the fact in front of dozens of acquaintances, family friends, great aunts, and old neighbors, I would not find the strength to say no, and that was the real treachery. I sat in silence, stroking the smooth surface of the wooden table with my palm, on which the cold, almost untouched tea still stood, and all those episodes that I had tried so hard not to remember for so long came to mind, as if they could disappear if I closed my eyes to them. I remembered the endless requests for a little help that came at the most inconvenient moments, sometimes after I'd already done my taxes and was trying to save a little for a vacation, sometimes in the middle of an important project, when my mind was overloaded with numbers and I didn't even have the energy to politely refuse. I remembered how they framed it as an emergency, how Dad would call in the middle of the night to say their power was going out, even though I'd see them posting photos from a restaurant in the morning, how Mom would say they urgently needed to pay for medication, and then I'd accidentally find photos on social media of a new bag bought at a big discount. All of it became brighter, clearer now, as if the conversation with Linda had erased the veil that hid the truth from me. They were never as needy as they claimed. They were simply used to the idea that I would always have their back, and now this was just an extreme version of that same habit. I realized I had a choice to make, one from which there was no turning back. I could let them play out their game until the end, thrust me into the spotlight at my mother's birthday party and force them into my home, forever their breadwinner and shoulder to cry on over their decisions. Or I could do something now, before it was too late, without giving myself time to hesitate. I picked up the phone, found the contact, and dialed. "Mike, it's Kimberly," I said as soon as I heard his voice. "Kimberly. Hi. How's the house?" His voice was cheerful, and I almost smiled, because I knew he was one of the few people who was genuinely happy for me. "Still like it," I said, and then paused before adding, "which is why I'm calling. I need to sell it." There was silence on the line. "Sell it? But you just bought it. Something wrong?" Mike sounded genuinely concerned. "No, the house is perfect. It's a family situation. I need to sell it ASAP and find another place. Can you help me?" I tried to keep my voice even though I was seething inside. "Well, you're in luck. I have clients who are looking for a house just like yours in this exact area. And by the way, I have other clients who are selling a great house that might be right for you. If you're serious, we can do it in a couple of months." "I am serious," I confirmed. "And Mike, the new house has to be on the other side of town, as far away from my current address as possible." I heard him chuckle slightly, more curious than judgmental, but he didn't ask any questions. "Okay, I can show you another house tomorrow, if you want. Yeah, the sooner the better." When we hung up, I sat back and took my first real breath in days, deep, like I was stepping into the unknown. I was scared, the way you might be about to dive into water and not see the bottom. But there was something else, too, a lightness, a sense of anticipation. I was really going to do this. I was going to sell the house I loved and start over, on my own terms. No pressure, no debt, no constant shadow of parental displeasure. The next day, just as the sun was rising over the horizon, Mike was standing at the gate of the house he wanted to show me. It was a larger house, with a wide lawn, a spacious kitchen, a fireplace in the living room, and a study with 2 windows overlooking a garden immersed in lilacs, and most importantly, it was far enough away that neither my parents nor my sister could accidentally walk in nearby. I looked at him and felt something click inside me, like a lock that finally fits. "I'll take it," I said, not even going into the bedroom. "Do you want to think about it?" Mike asked cautiously. "No, I'm sure, let's do it." Everything moved faster than I expected. Mike, as always, kept his word. His clients interested in my house were exactly the kind of people who don't waste time. Within a few weeks, we had confirmation that they were ready to pay my price and close the deal quickly. The timing was almost perfect. The paperwork for the new house was done in parallel, and I was able to get everything done without a single day between moving. But most importantly, it all happened in complete silence. I didn't tell anyone about the sale, not my friends, not my colleagues, not anyone who might accidentally let it slip. I was afraid that if even a hint of my moving reached my parents, they would understand that I was preparing for something, and they could change their plan, speed up, put pressure. I needed to do everything quickly and quietly, like a surgical incision, clean and precise. The hardest part was packing everything so that the neighbors would not notice. I started with small things. I removed books from the shelves, old jewelry that I did not use, framed photographs. I did this in the evenings, when no one was looking out of the windows, then gradually moved on to clothes, selecting what I could safely not wear for the next few weeks. I collected kitchen utensils with special care, trying not to make noise with the dishes. Each time I carried out another box, I felt another burden lifted from my shoulders along with it. The day of the move came early, almost before dawn, and seemed more like the beginning of an escape than the beginning of a new chapter. I had planned it all for 5 in the morning, not because it was more convenient, but because I needed to leave quietly, almost unnoticed, as if I were leaving something I didn't want to leave but couldn't hold on to any longer. When I left the house and saw the truck parked at the curb, with the movers already preparing the equipment, I had a strange feeling. As if I had escaped from a prison, from a cramped, stuffy cell where there had been not enough air for too long. These men were real professionals. They worked quickly, harmoniously, almost without words, carefully packing every box, every memory of mine, books, blankets, dishes, and even an old lamp that I still couldn't bring myself to throw out. By 9 in the morning, everything was finished. The house that I had called my refuge a month ago stood empty and deaf, as if it already belonged to someone else. In a sense, it was the new owners were going to get the keys that same day, and the entire moving operation coincided down to the minute. I left a bottle of wine on the kitchen counter with a note that said, "Welcome," not because I was sad to say goodbye, but because I wanted to leave behind a little warmth. I was in my new home before lunch. The rest of the day passed in a blur, unpacking boxes, hanging clothes in the closet, organizing the office, putting books back in place, and every movement felt lighter than I had felt in years. The next 2 weeks passed in one long, calm breath. I worked from home, explored the neighborhood, discovered a cozy coffee shop around the corner, struck up a conversation with a saleswoman at a local store, and felt something inside me that had been frozen for a long time begin to thaw. And most importantly, no one called with requests, no one stood at the door with a tear-stained face, no one tried to convince me otherwise. I felt free and, perhaps for the first time in a long time, happy. But one evening, as I poured myself a glass of wine and was about to watch something light before bed, the phone rang again. On the screen was my mother. I straightened up, my eyes frozen on the name, "Kimberly, dear." Her voice sounded too sweet, too enveloping, and I immediately understood what was behind it. "I just wanted to personally invite you to my birthday," she continued, and I held the receiver a little tighter than necessary. "It's going to be a big party. I invited everyone. I really want you to come. Of course I'll be there." I said, trying to sound calm. When? Next Saturday, at Romano's, at 7 p.m., there will be about 50 people, including Melissa, her fiancé, and his parents. It will be so wonderful to finally have the whole family together. That sounds great, I'll definitely come. Oh, that's wonderful, she said, sounding pleased, as if she'd just checked off an item on a list. I'm so glad you said yes, it's going to be such a special night. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, holding the phone in my hands, staring at the blank screen, thinking about what was about to happen. She, of course, had no idea that I knew about her plan, about the elaborate trap she, Dad, and Melissa were about to play. She thought she would catch me off guard with her unexpected announcement, force me to accept their decision in front of dozens of people, in front of relatives, in front of neighbors, in front of a world in which I had always tried to be strong but polite, decisive but not abrupt, but now everything was different. I was ready. Saturday night, I dressed with special care. I chose a dress that emphasized my figure, did my hair, applied light makeup. I was not just going to show up, I was going to walk in as a woman who would not be intimidated. The restaurant was full. The tables were decorated with fresh flowers, the air was filled with the smell of rosemary and roast partridge, and laughter was everywhere. Mom had invited everyone, relatives, old neighbors from the street, colleagues from a previous job, parishioners from church. Everyone was in a great mood. Melissa was beaming. Her fiancé was once again scrolling importantly through his phone. His parents looked like they'd just come from their own photo shoot, pressed, reserved, with that smug look that comes from people who are used to being right by default. Aunt Linda was there, too. When our eyes met, she nodded almost imperceptibly, as if to say, you know, I'm with you. I sat at the family table, smiling politely, chatting with someone about the weather, the food, the business. Everything was going smoothly, evenly, as if this evening had no hidden agenda. My parents were in a great mood, Mom laughing, Dad telling stories from the past that I'd heard 100 times. Melissa was unusually animated, as if she already knew that she would soon get what she wanted, and her fiancé kept glancing at his phone, as if even here he was bored. When dinner was served, elegant, beautifully served, with wine and candles, I knew the moment was near. I ate, I drank, I listened to the toasts, and I waited for my mother to stand, and finally she did. She stood up, tapped her glass with a spoon, and the soft ringing sound instantly attracted attention. Everyone, please have your attention, she said with a wide, beaming smile. The restaurant fell silent. Everyone, all 50 of us, turned to look at her. I wanted to thank you all for coming to celebrate my 55th birthday with me, she began, her eyes shining like someone about to accomplish something especially significant. It means so much to me to have you all here tonight. There was polite applause, and someone even raised a glass, but I sat quietly, almost motionless, watching her gaze slowly move from my father to Melissa, who was already glowing like a Christmas light. But I also have some wonderful news to share with you, my mother said, and at that moment I saw in her eyes that same confidence that she always maintained when she was sure that everything was under control. Your father and I have made a very important decision about our future, my mother said, her voice confident, almost solemn. And I, without moving, followed every word, because I knew that now was the beginning of what this whole scene had been staged for. Here it is. She paused, as if she was about to share some incredible news, and I heard how someone at the next table was already holding their breath. We sold our house, she announced proudly, and a slight hum of surprise was heard in the room. Someone gasped, someone exchanged glances, and I, still playing my role, feigned slight surprise, although my heart inside was pounding like a drum. We decided to spend this money on our beloved daughter's wedding, because she deserves a holiday worthy of her love, my mother continued and gestured with her hand towards Melissa. She immediately burst into tears of delight, grabbed the groom by the hand and whispered something in his ear. The audience began to applaud. Someone cried out, "What a family!" And Melissa's groom, for the first time that evening, put on a real smile. But Mom wasn't done yet. She raised her palm, calling for everyone to calm down, and spoke again. After paying for the wedding, we, of course, don't have much left, and so, here she straightened her shoulders and looked straight at me, we're moving in with our wonderful daughter Kimberly. We know that she will not refuse to help her parents. The whole room, the whole restaurant, all 50 people simultaneously turned their heads in my direction. I felt how everything contracted at that moment, glances, expectations, Restrained smiles, in which approval was already read. Mom was beaming. Dad looked at me as if he was already standing on the threshold of my house with suitcases. Melissa was sniffling and surreptitiously wiping her eyes with a napkin. Even the groom's parents nodded in admiration. Only Linda, my dear, wise aunt, sat quietly, her eyes fixed on me, as if checking whether I remembered everything, whether I was ready for this final act of the play. I took a deep breath, feeling the air fill my chest, and slowly rose from the table. My face was calm, my voice clear and loud, so that everyone could hear. Mom, Dad, I had no idea that you were planning this. I tried to put as much sincerity and slight feigned confusion into my words as possible. It's such a surprise. Mom nodded and answered with a shining face, we wanted it to be a surprise. We know how much you love us, and we knew that you would want to help. I nodded again. Of course I want to help, I said, and my parents' faces immediately showed a noticeable relief. Dad even put his arm around Mom, and the room exploded with applause. My home is always open to my parents, I added with a wide smile. Someone cried out, what a daughter. Someone stood up to make a toast. Everyone applauded. Mom beamed, as if she had won the grand prize in the lottery of life. Melissa burst into tears again. The groom's parents looked deeply impressed. When are you planning on moving? I asked, maintaining a good-natured expression. The new owners want us to vacate the house within a week, Mom replied, but if it's convenient for you, we can move anytime. Move whenever you want, I replied, with the same softness in my voice. At that moment, Aunt Linda, who was sitting a little further away, covered her mouth with her hand to hide a grin. I sat down again, finished my dinner, chatted with the guests, accepted congratulations and compliments for my kindness and generosity, as if everything was real. And then, as the evening began to draw to a close, I slipped out of the restaurant unnoticed, got into my car and drove home to my real new home, which my parents had not even suspected. The next 2 days passed so calmly that they seemed almost magical. I worked in my cozy office, drank my morning coffee on the porch, listened to the wind rustling the leaves outside the windows, and felt absolute satisfaction that everything had gone exactly as it should. I enjoyed this peace and my secret, like a child who hid a jar of candy from adults. But on the third day, the phone rang, and the familiar name was on the screen again. I picked it up, and a voice full of anger immediately rang out, Kimberly. What the hell have you done? It was Mom. We were at your house today, with your things. And there's a family living there. They said they bought the house and that you left a long time ago. I pressed the phone a little closer to my ear, squinted, and said calmly, oh, right, I sold it, and moved. You set us up, she screamed, you made us look like fools in front of everyone. Actually, Mom, I said, maintaining my icy calm, you decided to trap me by announcing your plan in front of everyone. I simply responded in kind, so it looks like we're even. Where are you? She almost shrieked. We're standing here with our suitcases. People are looking at us like we're crazy. I'm not telling you where I live, I said. I said you can live with your other daughter. She seems to have it all figured out now, with a $500,000 wedding and everything. Kimberly, you can't do this to us. I already did. Goodbye, Mom. I turned off the call and, without a second's hesitation, blocked all of their numbers. The next few days were turbulent, but I was ready. They called from other phones, tried to text from new numbers, left voicemails in which Dad's voice sounded disapproving, and Mom's voice alternated between crying and threatening. I didn't answer. As soon as I heard their voices, I hung up. I blocked new numbers, and with every blocked message, with every failed conversation, I felt like I was getting my life back, completely, without them. 2 weeks passed in absolute silence, as if life had finally paused to allow me to catch my breath and put things in order within myself. I spent my days in my new home, where calm confidence and comfort reigned, worked from the office, the windows of which looked out onto the garden with blooming hydrangeas, and in the evenings drank tea with honey on the veranda, listening to the crickets chirping and the wind gently touching the leaves of the trees. Everything was measured, simple, truly mine, and in this silence, it even began to seem to me that maybe all this was a bad dream, or maybe just a difficult chapter that I had finally turned over. And then one day, in the middle of the working day, when I was just about to send the final report to the client, the phone suddenly crackled on the table, flashing a familiar name, Aunt Linda. Kimberly, I thought you might want to know what happened after you left them at your old house, she said. and there was a hint of nervousness in her voice, like she wasn't sure if she should tell me everything she knew. I sat back in my chair, looked out the window at the gently swaying trees, and said calmly, "I'm listening." "They went to Melissa's," she began, "with all their stuff, just like you might expect. They thought they could stay with her for a while, you know, until they figured out what to do next. They were sure they'd be welcome, at least for a while." But she paused for a moment, and I felt the nervousness rise inside me. Her fiancé refused to let them in. He said it wasn't his concern, that if they decided to sell their house and spend the money, that was their choice and their own consequences. When they reminded him that they were the ones paying for the wedding, he laughed. I sighed, because, frankly, I wasn't surprised at all. He said that the money had already been wired, everything had already been paid for, the banquet hall, the flowers, the photographer, the food, everything. He wasn't going to change his plans because of their stupidity. And what did Melissa say? I asked, although the answer was already guessed. Linda sighed. "That's the hardest part." She took his side. She said that her parents were making a laughing stock of her in front of the groom's family, that they were embarrassing her, and she asked them to leave, just like that, on the street, with their things. I closed my eyes for a second. She literally threw them out the door? Yes, she said that she couldn't allow them to interfere with her future life. They had to look for an apartment with the last of their remaining money. They now live in some seedy corner on the other side of town, an old rented apartment, unfurnished, with peeling walls. It was all they could afford after the wedding. I felt two waves colliding inside me. The first, hot and restless, was a feeling of triumph, almost vengeful satisfaction that the truth had finally caught up with them, and the second, cold and sticky, was sadness, not pity, no, but sadness at how absurdly and irrevocably everything had collapsed. "I'm glad they finally faced the consequences," I said after a pause, "but it's still hard for me to hear that it happened this way." "All this is all that is left of the family." Linda did not interrupt. She knew that in such moments words were not needed. "And that's not all," she continued. After a minute, "they were so angry that they refused to go to the wedding. They said that now they had two traitors, you and Melissa. Can you imagine?" I sighed. I can believe it. They always did that, dramatize, build tragedies out of their own decisions. It was easier for them to declare everyone their enemy than to admit that they had painted themselves into a corner. Linda remained silent, but I knew that she agreed. After we hung up, I sat for a long time on the veranda with a cup of tea, looking at the blooming jasmine bush, and thought about everything that had happened. My parents had spent months, if not years, trying to subdue me, to persuade me to concessions, to build manipulations that would turn my life into an extension of their comfort, but instead, they lost everything: their home, their financial support. Both daughters, Melissa, having received her perfect wedding, lost their support, and, although she didn't realize it yet, she lost not only her parents, but me too. And I, finally, lived in a world that I had built myself, without pressure, without constant guilt, without the fear of being used. 3 months passed. During this time, I never heard a word from them, no calls, no letters, no complaints. My life flowed measuredly, filled with work, quiet joys and morning walks in the park. And then one day, scrolling through social networks on a lazy Saturday morning, I saw photos from Melissa's wedding. She posted a whole album, more than 50 pictures. Each photo screamed luxury: a snow-white tent against the backdrop of a lake, tables with live orchids, glasses of champagne, a designer dress, smiles, flashes, everything. It was like a picture from a glossy magazine, everything lit, thought out, flawless. But amidst all the extravagance, the opulence, the silks and crystals, I noticed something missing. There was no picture of her parents, no picture of her standing with her mom or dad, no shot of the bride's family, just her, the groom, his parents, and a few of their friends, in one picture. She was cutting the cake, her face lit by soft light, her smile wide, her dress flowing like water, but there was something elusive in her gaze, emptiness, sadness, or maybe it was me who wanted her there. She had gotten everything she wanted, but at what cost? She had lost her family, and perhaps she hadn't yet realized that this loss was forever. A few weeks later, when my life seemed to have finally settled down, and I no longer flinched at the sound of an incoming call, Aunt Linda's voice rang out again. Her tone was cautious, but not alarming, rather sympathetic. "Kimberly, I thought you should know. I ran into your parents at the grocery store today," she said. And I heard a hint of sadness in her voice. They looked terrible, old, tired, like the world had finally stopped playing along with their confidence and demanded a reckoning. I listened in silence as she went on, telling me that my parents still lived in the same small, dingy apartment on the outskirts of town where, she said, the walls seemed to whisper, whoever made the wrong choice lives here. They were barely able to afford the rent, the last of their money from their wedding gone faster than they could have imagined. My father, despite his age, was trying to find at least a part-time job, but at his age and with his personality, it was a nearly impossible task. My mother, Linda said, was on a constant campaign, telling anyone who would listen what terrible daughters she had, ungrateful, selfish, heartless. She's always, Linda sighed, playing the victim with double force, describing how much she's sacrificed for her children and how cruelly they've treated her. Nothing new. I wasn't surprised. My parents had never been good at admitting their own mistakes. They were masters at turning the tables so that everyone but themselves would be the culprit. Did they ask about me? I asked quietly. Yes, Linda replied. They wanted to know where you lived. I said I didn't know. They asked me to find out. But I made it clear that even if I knew, I wouldn't do it. I felt warmth from those words. Thank you, Linda. I really appreciate your respect for my privacy. You did the right thing. Kimberly, you don't have to let yourself be used. You're protecting yourself, and I don't blame you. After we hung up, I sat for a long time, looking out the window at the slowly falling evening, and tried to realize that I really didn't feel guilty, not a bit. My parents had made their choice, and now they were reaping the fruits of it. They had tried to play the game of manipulation, confident that I, as always, would bend, save, solve, but this time, everything had not gone according to their plan. They had put everything they had on the line, their home, their stability, their family, for one day of celebration, and they had lost. I thought about Melissa. Yes, she had gotten the wedding she had dreamed of, with glitter, with rose petals, with a buffet for 100 people and a designer dress, but the price had been higher than she had probably expected. She had lost her parents, she had lost me, and most importantly, she had tied her life to a man who, as it turned out, was ready to throw her parents out on the street without blinking an eye. I wanted to believe that someday, in silence, she would remember the day when she opened the door to her desperate parents and, instead of letting them in, simply closed it in their faces, and that this memory would haunt her. And I live peacefully. I work from my bright, cozy office, drink coffee in the mornings with a view of the garden, put my thoughts and my life in order. I have friends with whom I can talk about anything except family dramas. I am finally doing what I love. I don't communicate with my parents. I don't communicate with my sister. And so far I haven't told anyone my address, not because I'm hiding, but because there is still a fear inside that they might suddenly appear and demand what I will never give up again, my life. Sometimes, especially late at night, I ask myself, should I feel guilty? After all, my parents live in poverty, they are getting old, they are in need. After all, my sister cut off relations with them, and, in fact, they have no one else, and it is I, their eldest daughter, who, according to the unspoken family rules, should have extended a helping hand. But then I remember all those years, full of demands, reproaches, subtle manipulation, when every success of mine became a reason to ask for more, when every conversation ended with me feeling obligated. I remember that housewarming party, where I was humiliated in my own home. I remember how they tried to drive me into a corner, surround me with dozens of eyes, so that, without giving me a chance to refuse, they could sink their teeth into my life forever. I remember how they sold their house to spend it all on a party, and did not even think to ask what I thought about it, and that was when I made my decision. I decided that I would no longer allow myself to be used, that I would protect my space, my time, my boundaries. I decided that I, too, deserved to be the center of my own life, not just a service worker in someone else's scenario. And now, every day, I feel like that decision is setting me free. I sleep better, I work better, I smile more, and I'm no longer afraid of the phone ringing and the person on the other end saying, Kimberly, we have a problem. Now I have only one problem: how to make each day of my life truly mine, and I'm doing it.